thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica, and I'm with the Government and Community Affairs team here at SamTrans. Really happy that you are joining us this evening for our third and final round of outreach for Reimagine SamTrans. We've been at this for quite some time. So tonight you're going to hear about our recommended network. This is one network, one way the bus system would go that we're seeking feedback on. We'd really love to hear from you what you like, what you don't like, what you would change. And, we need to hear all of it because at the end of the day, there are some more choices that will need to be made. So getting all these pieces of feedback from you is really important. We're here to have a conversation, to answer questions. You'll see at the bottom of your screen the Q&A. We'd really like to take questions through there. It really helps us manage them. So feel free to put them in. We'll answer at the end. We'll also have this slide deck translated into Spanish, Simplified Chinese, and Tongan. We're going to drop links to those in the chat right now so that you can follow along if you're in one of our interpretation channels with the PowerPoint. So again, please put your questions in the Q&A. We love to hear from you. And it'll just take us a second to get those PowerPoints into the chat. But with that, we're going to hand this over to Christy, our Director of Planning, who's going to walk you through some of the presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening. My name is Christy Wegener, and I'm the Director of Planning for SamTrans. Thank you for joining us. I am joined by Millie Tollison, who is our Manager of Strategic Planning, and she and I will be splitting this presentation tonight. Tonight, we are going to talk to you about the goals of Reimagine SamTrans and the timeline for our project. We will talk about the background of our project, including the 3 network alternatives that we developed and took out for public input last spring. And we'll talk to you about what we heard from the public at that time. And then the guiding principles, which our recommendation for our new network is rooted in. Then I will turn the presentation over to Millie, who will talk to you about the bus service changes that we are proposing for SamTrans. And we will do a deep dive into the changes that we are proposing for South County. We will close it up by talking about the opportunities to give feedback during this last and final round of outreach, and then open it up for Q&A. And as Jessica mentioned, we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A feature in the Zoom. When we launched our study, we identified 3 goals. The first was to improve the experience for our existing SamTrans customers. We wanted to grow new and more frequent ridership on our bus system. And we wanted to build our efficiency and effectiveness as a mobility provider in the county. And we recognize that the pandemic and COVID-19 has impacted these 3 goals. We recognize it is more important than ever that those who are riding our bus system have a good experience. We recognize that it may be challenging to grow new ridership on our bus system, but we think by making the right changes, we can grow more frequent ridership on our network. And it is more important than ever that we are efficient and effective with our resources. We launched our project in summer of 2019, and the first part included an analysis of our data, including ridership, on-time performance, to really understand areas where our service was productive and areas where people weren't using the buses. We did market research and public outreach during the summer and fall of 2019 to understand what people thought of our bus system and what they wanted out of SamTrans. Moving into the winter and spring of 2020, we started to work on our design guidelines, which is our guidebook for how we design our bus system. And we had to press the pause button in March 2020 due to the pandemic. We restarted our project in October or September of 2020. We went to our board to brief them on all of the work that had been done and restarted our work on the service design guidelines, as well as crafting 3 different alternative bus networks. We took those 3 networks out to the public in spring 2021 to get feedback on those, the alternatives. Now we've spent the summer months digesting what we heard in our phase 2 public outreach, and now have crafted and created our recommended bus network, which we are presenting to you tonight. Phase 3 outreach started in beginning of October and is our 3rd and final outreach phase before we make final adjustments to our network and take this to our board for adoption in February 2022. We would look to start to implement our new network in August of 2022 with additional changes and an expanded bus network in 2023. As I mentioned, we developed 3 different bus network alternatives, which we took out to the public this past spring. The first alternative looked at emphasizing direct and frequent bus service within our county. This alternative removed service from into San Francisco and reinvested those resources to create the most frequent network within San Mateo County. Alternative 2 looked at how to improve connections to rail and the region. This alternative included robust express bus service. And lastly, alternative 3 looked at how to retain the most coverage within and throughout our county. This alternative identified 4 on-demand zones or microtransit to provide coverage in 4 different communities and expanded midday and weekend service. During phase 2 outreach, we did what we could to get feedback from our riders, our stakeholders, and the community. We had 4 multilingual public meetings that were virtual, much like the one we're having tonight. We had 21 community pop-up events where we were out at bus stops talking to our riders. We had 40 presentations to stakeholders, city staff, and elected officials, multiple meetings with our SamTrans advisory groups. We talked to our bus operators at 10 different events and engaged with 4 community-based organization partnerships. And we heard a lot. We received 2,000 responses to our survey. We engaged with over 1,300 members of the community who participated in our outreach events. We talked to multiple bus operators and received 42 responses from our workforce. Of those who responded to our survey, over 25% identified as Hispanic or Latino, and we are very proud of that. And what did we hear? So we heard that respondents to our survey wanted frequent service. They wanted the bus to come more often. They didn't want to wait as long. And they wanted our service to be reliable and on time. People wanted connections to other SamTrans routes, as well as to the other rail stations in San Mateo County. And we heard that people wanted more service, not just during commute hours, but outside of commute hours, during the evening and on the weekends. And we looked at the differences in the survey responses. So in general, everyone on the chart on the left, we heard that alternative 2, which is expanded connections to rail in the region, was more favored than any of the other 2 alternatives. But if we looked at what our riders wanted, we saw that alternative one, which is a frequent network, really rose to the top with 38% of riders voting for that alternative. So now, crafting our preferred network or our recommended network, which we are presenting to you tonight, we identified 4 guiding principles that really root our recommendation. The first is to focus on our customer and our rider and think about them when we make decisions to the bus system. We want to consider our workforce and our operators and design routes and schedule them appropriately so that they can be reasonably delivered by our workforce. We want to be effective with our resources and make sure that we are finding efficiencies where we can and that we are using our resources smartly. And very importantly, we want to advance social equity and provide quality transportation that supports the principles of social equity and in the communities that rely on the bus the most. The study team has identified equity priority areas within our county. And we did this by mapping communities that have low populations of, high numbers of low-income persons, identify as non-white, and do not have access to a car. So thinking about these equity priority areas, what does it mean for SamTrans to prioritize them? It means that when we get requests for bus service, we think about these areas and prioritize service to these areas first, that we prioritize our infrastructure and pilot projects in these equity areas. It means that we reallocate or remove service in low ridership areas and reallocate it and put it in these areas that are a higher need. And it also means that we accept lower ridership and productivity for routes that serve these areas. So moving to our recommendation, which is why you are here today. We have crafted this network tonight, and it has been based on all of the work that has been done to date. The deep dive into our data and our ridership and productivity, looking at our ridership both pre-pandemic as well as the ridership trends that we have observed throughout the pandemic. We are looking at equity and looking at those equity need areas. We have our guiding principles. We have done market research at a countywide level to understand what the attitudes and awareness of SamTrans and our services. We have done travel market analysis, looking at where people go in the county. And all throughout our study, we have relied very heavily on the community and rider input. The goals of our network are threefold. First is equity. And we keep saying this word, but it is a very important piece of our network. We want to prioritize buses to the highest need communities from underutilized or duplicative routes. We want to be efficient and create faster and reliable service through direct and consolidated routes. And we want to provide connections. So in doing so by expanding our all-day service and increasing service to transit hubs and job centers. Now I'm going to turn it over to Millie, who will walk you through the specifics of our recommendation.
Thanks, Christy, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. So like Christy said, I am now going to dive into really the recommendations and the details of the proposed changes to our bus network. And as Christy mentioned, we really pulled pieces from each of the 3 alternatives that we presented last spring when we created this new network. So this slide is kind of an overview of the highlights from each of the 3 alternatives that hopefully you commented on and reviewed last spring. So from alternative 1, we are proposing to include 4 high frequency, 15-minute, all day routes. And that's 4 of 7 that were potentially going to be included. And those routes will be routes ECR, 120, 130, and 296. And we're also recommending that an additional 4 routes in our system get better peak or midday frequency, perhaps from a bump from 30 minutes to 20 minutes or some other kind of increase. And those routes are routes 110, 250, 276, and 275. From alternative 2, we are recommending to fully restore the FCX trips that that route was making before the pandemic. And we're proposing to do that only in the traditional commute direction. So the direction of out of Foster City in the morning, into San Francisco in the morning, and the reverse in the evening. But we are proposing to bring back all of the trips in that direction that we had before the pandemic. And we're also proposing a new route between East Palo Alto and San Bruno, BART, which would use 101. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Also, new direct connections to Skyline College and College of San Mateo, CSM, as well as an extension of Route 130 into Oyster Point in South San Francisco. From alternative 3, we're proposing to include 2 new on-demand zones. And on-demand service is a type of transportation service that can be booked in real time by using an app or calling our customer service team. And you can use that service to make a trip that begins and ends anywhere in the designated on-demand area. And I'll talk more in a couple slides about where we're proposing to have that type of service. Also, from alternative 3, improved weekend and evening service on 5 routes, 121, 130, 270, 276, and 295. And an extension of service on our Route 281 from East Palo Alto all the way into the Stanford University campus. So this slide shows our proposed frequency of service on all of our routes, all of our local routes throughout our system on weekdays. And our existing service is on the left, and our proposed new network is on the right. And I think the key thing to know here is that a little bit about what the colors mean. So the red lines indicate routes that would run 15 minutes or better. Blue is 20 to 30-minute frequency. Green is 60-minute, and yellow is peak only service. And I'll also point out, Christy talked about our equity priority areas. Those areas are shaded in purple on this map. So you can kind of get a sense of the areas that we have identified as being our priority, equity priority areas. And I think a couple other things to note. So you can see a little bit more red on the map on the right, a little bit more blue, and a lot of alignment in those colors in those equity priority areas. Next slide, please. Also want to talk about weekend service improvements throughout the county. We are proposing earlier or later service on weekends in South San Francisco, in Redwood City, and in East Palo Alto. We're also proposing new weekend service on a number of routes. So bringing more of our system up to a 7-day-a-week system so that people can really rely on our buses 7 days a week to get where they need to go. New weekend service on Woodside Road, on Alameda de los Pulgas and in the Linda Mar area in Pacifica, and improvements in weekend frequency on 8 routes in the system, including Route ECR. We have some new areas where we're proposing to add new local bus service. I mentioned that extension into Oyster Point in South San Francisco. Also a new bus route between East Palo Alto, Redwood City, Redwood Shores, SFO, and San Bruno BART that would use the new express lanes on US 101. New connection from Daly City BART up to Skyline College. Yeah, that's the yellow line Christie's noting, as well as a new route between downtown San Mateo and College of San Mateo. And those 2 on-demand zones, which are shown shaded in kind of an orange color. And those 2 areas that we're recommending for that service will be in East Palo Alto and in Half Moon Bay. Now, to do all of this, we do have to recommend some reductions in our local bus service network. And we're doing this in areas where we have low ridership, and we think we can speed up some of our routes, make them more direct and more efficient by removing some deviations on some of our routes. So just to highlight a few of the areas, in Daly City and San Bruno, we are recommending some route straightening, but almost all riders will still be within a 5-minute walk of one of our bus stops. In Belmont, Redwood Shores, and Foster City, we are recommending removing some segments of routes that are low ridership and not in equity priority areas. But I do want to note that school services will remain in many of these areas. So the areas that are actually shown in blue on the map, those are areas where the school service will still be available. So lastly, East Palo Alto and on the coast side, some removal of low ridership routes there. But again, school services would remain, or the service would be replaced with an on-demand type of service. So just talking about our route ECR for a moment. This is a really important route for us. It runs between Palo Alto and Daly City on El Camino Real. And what we are proposing for this route is that it will remain one long but important route. We're not proposing to split the route. If you participated in our second phase of outreach, you may remember that we had one concept that would actually have split the route into 2. But we're proposing right at this time to maintain the single route end to end. But we're proposing to pursue perhaps some stop consolidation where we have routes that are low ridership or they're very close together. We may recommend consolidating some of our routes, some of our stops in order to speed up the bus and make it more reliable. But there will be separate outreach on that effort next year. But one exciting thing about our route ECR proposal is bringing the route ECR up to service every 15 minutes on weekends, which is a doubling of the frequency that we currently offer on weekends. So overall outcomes of this proposal, we are able with this proposal to really increase the number of people and jobs that are within a quarter mile of a high frequency bus route. And we're talking about 185,000 more people who would live within a 5-minute walk of a high frequency bus route, and 125,000 more jobs would be connected at that distance. We're also focused on improving access from our equity priority areas to key places, such as connecting East Palo Alto to jobs and health services in the Stanford area, to SFO, to Redwood City, and to BART in North County. and connecting South San Francisco residents all the way into Oyster Point and also to Skyline College. So diving a little bit deeper into South County, I have a couple slides here. The first is going to focus on what we see as really service enhancements for South County. Just want to reiterate 2 frequent 15-minute, all day, 7-day-a-week routes in North County. This would be Route ECR, which is, kind of the gray line that Christy is noting on El Camino Real, along with our Route 296, which is the green line between Redwood City and East Palo Alto. Also proposing that direct access to the Stanford Oval and the Stanford University campus on Route 281, and simplifying and making more consistent service up to Kenyatta College from Redwood City. And right now we have, well, I should say pre-pandemic, we had 3 different routes that served these 2 endpoints on different days of the week. And we're proposing to consolidate those 3 routes into one new route. It's shown in yellow on this map. It would run between Redwood City Transit Center and Kenyatta College up Woodside Road. And it would run later in the evening on weekdays. We heard requests from people who live on near Woodside Road that they would like later service in the evening. And we would also provide more frequent service in the peak times on this consolidated route. That would be 20 minutes in the morning peak. A new service, I've already discussed that, between East Palo Alto and San Bruno BART, hopping on the freeway. New weekend service between San Mateo and Redwood City via Route 295. And again, that on-demand service area, which you can see a little bit better on this map. It would include all of East Palo Alto, as well as the Bellhaven community in Menlo Park. And it would include the Woodland apartments and the O'Keefe area apartments on the west side of 101. So what are some of the sort of trade-offs to get all of those benefits? We are proposing to delete Route 280 and replace it with our on-demand service, as well as more frequent service on Route 281, which operates on University. And that would also be coupled with increased service on the 296, which runs through that part of East Palo Alto. Route 398 would be also deleted due to other options that people have, including our ECR route, our 292 route. Our new EPX route would provide a connection between Redwood City and SFO via the freeway, as well as Caltrain is a good option for getting into San Francisco. It is worth noting that this new alignment for reaching Kenyatta College would be about 10 or 15 minutes longer than our Route 274 that we offered before the pandemic. And we are proposing to remove service in the portion of Redwood Shores that is east of Bridge Parkway due to low ridership. But again, school service in that area would remain available. We're proposing to remove a low ridership deviation to Cordillera Center on Route 295. And we're also looking at ways that we can consolidate some of our school routes. These are routes that serve the same school and have very similar routing, and also have available capacity on the buses. So we're proposing to consolidate school routes 83 and 84, which serve Hillview Middle School. We're also proposing to eliminate school route 80, which serves Hillview, as well as Oak Knoll Elementary School, due to low ridership. And finally, we are proposing to eliminate the morning trips on routes 85, which serves Ormondale Elementary School, and Route 87, which serves Woodside High. And we propose to actually remove all of the service on Route 85 due to low ridership in the alternatives. But in this new network, we're proposing to at least preserve the afternoon trips on both of these routes, while deleting the morning trips, which only typically get about half the ridership compared to those afternoon trips. So we took a look and gave some consideration to how well this recommended network matches and achieves some of the metrics of our guiding principles. And while we think we move the needle a little bit on almost all of these things, the areas that we're really focusing on and addressing are adding more midday and weekend service, which is something that our riders have told us they need and want. We are focusing on leveraging other transportation investments, such as those express lanes on 101, as well as BART and Caltrain in our service area. And finally, very focused on increasing the share of residents in those equity priority areas that have access to high frequency service. So looking ahead, how are we going to implement these changes? We are definitely anticipating a phased implementation. We are anticipating beginning to make changes next summer. So these aren't changes that are likely to occur right away. You don't have to worry, it's not going to change next week. But we are looking to begin implementing cost neutral changes in August 2022. And then a second phase in early 2023 as we recruit and train the additional bus operators that we'll need to deliver this new plan. So how can you participate? There are many ways to participate. The best is really to hop on reimaginesamtrans.com, where you can review all of the route change recommendations and leave a comment for us. You can also attend a virtual public meeting, which you're doing right now, which is wonderful. You can talk to us at a pop-up event out in the community. And you can also participate in a public hearing, which we will be holding with our board of directors on November 3rd. And I should also mention it's not listed on here, but another great way that's available to you is to call our customer service team. If you prefer not to use the website, our customer service team is available to take your comments by phone. So we have held two and a half of our virtual public meetings. We're here at the third meeting, the South County focused meeting, and we'll have one more meeting focused on the coast side a week from tonight. And again, that board of directors meeting will be on Wednesday, November 3rd at 2 o'clock. So with that, I think I have seen the Q&A lighting up throughout the presentation. So I think we'll move into Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Millie. I also want to do a quick thing just so everyone knows we're getting some word that Zoom is being a little buggy. So hopefully we all don't vanish off you all of a sudden. If we do, we have been having issues with Zoom tonight. But if we don't, we'll go to 6:30 tonight with these questions. So we're getting a bunch of questions in through the Q&A. I'm actually going to start with one. I'm going to pull one out, school related. And the question is, do you know the current ridership on Route 85 versus the 2019 numbers? And the reason I wanted to highlight that question first is to let everyone know that when we talk about low ridership in this project, we have been looking at 2019 numbers. No one is getting unfairly assessed because they have low ridership during the pandemic. We're very aware of that. We look at the current numbers too, but we very much have looked at the 2019 numbers that when you hear us talking about low ridership, we are talking pre-pandemic. All right, so going up to one of the first questions we get, I rely on the ECR bus a lot. I'm concerned that SamTrans will reinstate the ECR Express at the expense of the ECR Local. I remember when you had the ECR Express and it affected the ECR Local negatively. The Express carries very few people and the local ECR was extremely crowded. Will you bring back the ECR Express?
I can take that one, and I apologize. I think I did not say out loud that bullet on that slide. But we are not recommending bringing back the ECR Rapid, that's what it was called, at this time. We know that so many people rely on our local ECR route, and we don't want to degrade that route at the expense of the Rapid route. So right now, we're very focused on making the ECR route the best route it can be with the most frequency we can provide.
And we'll be doing more outreach on ECR in the future as we kind of refine the actual service on the road. Can you elaborate on what on-demand means and how it works? So I think a little more detail on on-demand would be great.
I'm happy to take that. On-demand, like Millie indicated earlier, is a type of transportation that you can book in real time, similar to Uber or Lyft, where you use an app or you can call a call center. And it is not door to door, but it is also not necessarily bus stop to bus stop. It is dynamic and flexible, and it can provide transportation in areas where the larger buses cannot travel for various reasons. So you can, within a zone, book, request a trip. You get a message back with the estimated time for your pickup. Then the vehicle is routed to you. There are oftentimes other people on board the bus. And I'll note it is most often operated with smaller vehicles, similar to our paratransit service. So you get on board your vehicle and it then will drop you at your destination in real time. And it provides a very flexible option to provide coverage in communities that are somewhat difficult to serve with a large bus. And we had a pilot with about 2 years ago where we looked at how to operate on-demand service in the neighborhood of Lindemar in Pacifica. So we learned a lot through that pilot, and we think that on-demand is a good fit for both East Palo Alto and Half Moon Bay as a complement to the other bus service changes we are recommending.
Okay, great. And Christy, can you actually explain, like, if I'm a user and I want to book on demand, what are my options for doing that?
We have two options. You could book through a smartphone application. So you can download the app and then either input your address or drop a PIN, and you input where you are and where you want to go within the zone. Or if you don't have access to a smartphone, you can call a call center, where the call center staff will take your request and input your starting point and your ending point, and you have all the same experience as someone using a smartphone app. It is just through a call center staff member booking your ride. And it in Pacifica, this was the same fare as our fixed route bus system. So the buses had fare boxes and accepted Clipper and all the other fare media that we accept on board our larger buses.
Okay. And I will add also that everything will be multilingual. So there's a lot, especially with the call center. All right, I'm going to take one more question. I'm going to just for a second acknowledge the school questions coming in. We're going to do one non-school related question, and then we'll move over to the questions on the school routes. Is there any opportunity to link up Route 276 and 281 that would enable more East Palo Alto residents to get to Redwood City directly. That was a good proposal from Alternative 3.
I can take a stab at that one. So we appreciate that you liked that one, that concept in the alternatives. Ultimately, for right now, there was a lot of concern among staff of linking a route in Redwood City with a route that travels on University in Palo Alto, University Avenue. Anyone who, at least pre-pandemic, used University knows it can get really backed up. So we were concerned about our ability to provide reliable service on the portion in Redwood City by linking it up with a route that uses University. It just gets harder and harder for us to stay on time and maintain reliability. So that was the concern about that, that proposal. We still do have Route 296, which directly connects East Palo Alto to a different part of Redwood City. I understand that, but it does travel along Middlefield to Redwood City Transit Center directly from East Palo Alto.
All right, so we're going to move over to the school-related questions. Before we do, I want to just a couple of things. So, we talk about our count and how many riders. We have a couple different ways that we count the number of students. So we're not guessing. We have two different methods of counting, and I'll let someone else give you exactly how that works. But I want to lay that out that we're doing technical counts on this. So just as a starting point, we don't love cutting back anyone's service. We understand any service cutback we make, removal will negatively impact some people. What we have to do is look at the whole system and where do the resources benefit the most number of people, because we are resource constrained. We don't have enough operators. We're constantly hiring. We have a really significant internal process to hire. But for us to make any changes, all the improvements you've heard about tonight, the on-demand service, the weekend service on ECR, to get those new things, we have to find resources somewhere in the system. So we have levels of ridership we're looking at. And so the routes we're talking about now on cutting back are routes that compared to anywhere else in the system have much lower ridership for the comparable school routes. And also there is a reality that we are leaning into the equity concept of putting the buses with the people who need them the most. And that is based in a lot on people who don't have cars. It's communities that don't have other options but the bus. And we recognize that that is a choice and that is a trade-off, but it also is a trade-off that makes good business sense. Again, we're trying to maximize our service. And by putting buses in the communities where people ride the bus the most, we're most likely to drive up ridership. So I want to fully just acknowledge on the front end that this is hard. We don't like doing it, but we have to find resources. And that's why these routes were chosen for cutback. So with that, we're going to start with the Route 80. There's a whole lot of comments. So I'm just going to kind of pick out some pieces. I also want to say, again, I started out with this as a conversation. If you want to make an official comment, that's not what this is. Please go to reimaginesamtrans.com, make your comment there, put that into our record. We do want to get this feedback. We do understand it. We have been talking to the schools and trying to, come up with the best options here. So starting with the 80, if ridership were to increase, could it possibly stay? And there's another comment, please keep it. My kid just started riding from Oak Knoll School to Menlo and it serves our community. See if there's any other, many of my daughter and many of her friends are using it. It's very helpful to us. I'm trying to see if there's other ones specifically on the 80. I think those were all the Route 80 comments. So I don't see a specific question, but maybe we could talk a little bit about why the choices around the 8 or the recommendation around the 80 was made.
Thanks, Jessica. I think Jonathan Steketee, who is our manager of operations planning, just turned on his camera, and he is responsible for managing and analyzing all of the data for all of our routes, and also works very closely with all the schools in providing school service. So Jonathan, are you able to take this question?
Yeah, I saw a couple questions in the Q&A about the Route 80, and first I'll say that you're more than welcome to put your comments in at Reimagine SamTrans.com. That's the best place to log them. When we're looking at the Route 80, it's a trip, fairly short trip, but we still have to get a bus out there, and we're carrying an average of 6 riders, right? 6 students a day, and so when we look at that route, we're not just looking at the length of the route itself, but what we call deadhead, or the amount of time that it takes to get a bus out to that route and then back to a different route. And so all of our school routes are resource intensive, right, to have done. And we want to make sure that we're serving students, but we also want to make sure that we're highly productive. But 6 students on a route is incredibly low for us. Productivity wise, some of our routes are over 40, 50, 60 students we would consider a really productive school route. So, that's the challenge. We know that we can't serve everyone, and we know that we need to put those resources where they do the most good.
And I also want to acknowledge I missed one of the Route 80 comments, which was a teacher and parent at Oaknell in Menlo. They have a number of students who ride the 80 and ask, how can we petition to keep it? If ridership on Route 80 increased, could it possibly stay? So on the petition side, it's please make your comments to Reimagine SamTrans.com. We're going to be summarizing all of this for our board of directors so they know. And then I guess overall with the school routes, if we saw a dramatic increase in ridership, maybe Jonathan, you could talk a little bit about how we address school routes and how they're a little bit different than the rest of the system.
Yeah, school routes are definitely different than the rest of the system in that, we do treat them as a route. They are public routes, but when we look at them, we focus on the bell times for the schools. So we work really closely with the schools to make sure that the bus gets there in the morning by the time the bell rings, and in the afternoon picks up at dismissal. And we also touch those routes more often, right? So things change, students graduate, neighborhood enrollment can change. So we're constantly looking at those routes actually on a monthly basis to track ridership, and then we can make changes with the schools each year before August, really.
If I could add to that, Jessica, just 2 things that our service plan that you are seeing tonight does depend on us being able to reallocate some resources. So, the routes that we have identified for consolidation, or segments of routes that we have identified for removal, those resources are put back into our service elsewhere. So I would also say that I did not mention this. This is a study that's done once every 10 years. We are not walking away from our network once we implement this. Every year we change routes up to 3 times. And so I want everyone to just be aware that we are constantly receiving requests for service, constantly looking at new developments, analyzing our ridership, and making adjustments to the network. So we don't walk away and wait for another 10 years to do service planning. Service planning is something we do almost every day.
All right, so we have a lot of questions about the 85, and I'm just going to highlight some of the points. Many people are commenting that there's 20 children. How can that be low? There's also comments that the route was established when children who used to go to Woodside Elementary were moved over to Ormondale, and there was a promise of a bus. Questions about the numbers of students in the morning, and then there's a comment where someone believes that the ridership in the morning is higher than what we have been saying. And so we have about 5 more minutes left. I do want to say, if we didn't get to your question tonight, And again, I am recognizing that I'm trying to consolidate the school questions. Please email us at reimagine@samtrans.com. We do need to end at 6:30, but we do monitor that email address and respond. So just generally, if we could talk about the ridership and on the 85 and the decision making behind that.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry, before you go, I do want to make one thing. There is also several comments where people are saying that it's actually ridership is better now than pre-pandemic, or that the ridership is robust now.
Yeah. So again, one thing that I'll say is that we understand that, buses are important to people for sure. And we have to look at where those resources are best used. Ridership in the teens and even up to 20 on a school route is not super productive when we look at the entire system. And there are places in the system where we can serve more passengers than 20 for a route. So I don't want to ignore or seem like we don't care about ridership, but we need to make sure that we're putting resources where the greatest good can be done. And again, for school route, that we have to look at the deadhead going out and coming back in, operating once a day. 20 passengers is not a lot. And we'll look at it again, and we'll continue to monitor the ridership this year. But we're not seeing a significant growth from last year, or for pre-pandemic, I should say, right? 2020 was kind of a skip year. We'll continue to look at it, but I can tell you that it's one of the lowest performing routes in the system and lowest performing school focused routes in the system.
And just to add on to what Jonathan's saying, I think our most recent ridership counts indicates 16 or 17 trips a day being taken on the 85, and that is split between a morning bus and an afternoon bus. And so to give you an idea of how full or not full or empty these buses are, less than 10 if you just split that evenly. And often we see higher ridership in the afternoons and lower ridership in the mornings. So that's why we are to reallocate the morning trips, but preserve the afternoon trips.
There's a comment in here about photographs. Can you actually explain? We don't take photos of the people on the bus. Can you explain how we count the people on the bus?
Do you want to take that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I can. We have two different methods that we utilize in order to count passengers on the bus. The first one is called GFI. It's run through our fare box. And every time somebody gets onto the bus and pays a fare or uses a pass, that individual is counted as being on the bus. The second process is that we actually have APCs, which is automatic passenger counters. They're essentially laser screens in the doors of the buses. As you walk through, you break the barrier, and that will count you as a passenger. It also will know whether or not you're moving in the direction onto the bus or off of the bus, so we can get both boarding and alighting data. Now, of course, with both of those, we also go out and do physical checks of the buses to make sure things are accurate. But that's the three different ways that we verify passenger counts.
So again, for your official comments, please go to reimaginesamtrans.com. You can email us at reimagine@samtrans.com. Again, these are the hard decisions. This is what we are working on. There will be a hearing on November 3rd, board adoption in February, and we really appreciate you being here with us tonight. And with that, I think we're going to close this meeting. We have one more meeting next week focusing on the coast. And so if you are interested in coast service, please join us there. And so again, thank you so much. And with that, we're going to end the meeting.